Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, where today we're going to do a full-length, non-spoilery review of Ashes on the Waves by Mary Lindsey. So this is a young adult retelling of the poem Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe, and we are following our main character of Liam, and Liam lives on this island that is cut off from civilization, and his life just is terrible. And then Annabel Layton shows up, and she is this beautiful bright point in his life. They do get together as a couple, and then the other worlders who live on and around this island decide that they're going to go ahead and test the love of this couple in increasingly cruel ways. And the story goes from there. So, content warnings. Pretty hardcore ableism, suicidal thoughts and ideation, an attempted lynching that does get pretty far, an attempted rape of a minor that is primarily off page, is interrupted and then stopped, and then some low-key misogyny that occasionally kicks it into high gear. So first, let's talk about world building. You guys, I really enjoyed the world building on this. I will, just as a disclaimer, I don't visualize anything pretty much ever. I'm really bad at it. It's basically pointless for me to even try. So I don't. So I can't tell you if it's a good visual read, but I will say that the feelings that I got from this story as I was reading it are the same kind of feelings that I've always gotten from reading Edgar Allan Poe's stories. That very bleak, dreary, oppressive kind of feeling where, even when something goes right, you're like, okay, it's either not going to last or it's not actually going to end up being a good thing, right? And that's really the kind of feeling that I got from this story. This setting was perfect for this. This island, like I said, is cut off from modern civilization. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. They, basically everybody is subsistence living. Like, they are in abject poverty to the point where, if you have a girl child and you marry them off as soon as you can because it's one less mouth for you to feed. So that kind of really oppressive, bleak feeling. And I think it was just done so well. And part of why it was actually done so well is we have this juxtaposition with how life is on this island with Annabel Layton, who is coming, she's what shows us that this is actually set in modern times. She arrives to the island on a helicopter. She comes from, this is a very backwards kind of island for her. She lives in a mansion that has a name I do not know how to pronounce, that has running water and electricity and enough food to feed the entire village for a week. And it's the only house on the island that is like this. And it just really reminds us that, yes, Liam's life is terrible, and it didn't have to be this way. It could have, if he had been born anywhere else, his life would have been so different. And even Annabelle reminds us, she is trying to get Liam to get off, trying to get him off this island that she can tell is just clearly bad for him, right? And it seems like this insurmountable challenge to get off the island. And again, it just reinforces this idea that this is, it didn't have to be this way, which again reinforces this very bleak, oppressive kind of feeling that you get from this story. So I think overall, this was fantastically done. Next, let's talk about the characters. So Liam is really, I do like him as a character, and I found him to be pretty interesting. And he's got his own little character arc that I really liked watching, where his entire life he's been told this story of his history. And as modern readers, we kind of scoff at it, right? Even though this is a fantastical setting with fantastical elements, his story doesn't seem, even with the fantastical elements, it doesn't really seem to line up with what we would expect. So, but Liam doesn't really challenge it fully until Annabelle comes and starts challenging it, and then he starts thinking about it. And we get to watch his character arc, and it's just really lovely. It is a bit more background than I would have liked. However, I completely understand why. And it's mostly to keep the focus on him and Annabel as a couple, right? So speaking of Annabel, honestly, she was fine. I didn't think she was a bad character. I just didn't care, honestly. Like there was, well, I just didn't, she really wasn't anything special or interesting. It was just a character I've seen so many times. So I didn't really feel anything for her. And then once Liam and Annabelle got together as a couple, honestly, like occasionally, like little bits of their past, their their background, their personalities would definitely shine through. But they were just kind of subsumed by this relationship, which makes sense for this retelling. But it does mean that, like, I didn't really feel like I got to know Annabelle very well. All of the side characters were interesting, and we got varying levels of what their background actually is. So they all had like interesting, intriguing backgrounds, and some of them we found out about and some we didn't. At least of the three like secondary characters we had. And everybody else on the island is just kind of there and really there to drive home this point that they all hate Liam and it's a terrible place to live. That's the point. I wish we could have spent a little bit more time with the characters, but this is not truly a broad cast of character focused story. It's really focusing in on Annabelle and Liam, and so while I wish I had more, I completely understand why we did not. So next, let's talk about the plot. So I gave you the plot in the beginning that the otherworlders are testing the love of this couple, and that's really what the main plot is. There are no surprises. That's what it is. And that main storyline is definitely a little bit thin to be carrying the full weight of a novel. So, it definitely wasn't quite enough to intrigue me enough to want to continue going back to this world. Like, it didn't really pull me in. But there are other side plots that are going on, which I did find to be incredibly intriguing. So again, this delving into Liam's backstory, his history, we dived into some of Miss Ronan's and some of Francine's, like these other secondary characters. And that mystery and finding out little bits and pieces of those histories, like clues to their history, really was what pulled me in for the plot itself. That being said, the ending of those side plots was not to my particular tastes. Like, all the clues are there, but Liam is everything is so happening so fast for Liam that he can't really put the clues together himself necessarily. And so, I mean, he does to some extent, but like each mystery is solved by someone info dumping the story, right? Like the story of the history. And I didn't love that particular execution. I still thought that the actual story itself was very, very interesting. I just didn't like the execution. But overall for plot, I thought it was still pretty good. I liked that there were these side plots that were introduced to kind of help carry the weight of this story. I think it was smart to do. So I appreciated that. Next, let's talk about pacing and writing style. So the writing style, like I said, I can't tell you if it's like a good description or anything, but it did give me those Edgar Allan Poe vibes with this very bleak, oppressive kind of story. The writing itself is pretty straightforward. Occasionally I had to reread some dialogue, especially from Liam, because he is pretty old-fashioned in his speech. It is a dual perspective story. I haven't mentioned that because it's not overwhelmingly dual perspective, and it's one of the best ones that I've seen done. So it's primarily from Liam's perspective, but every once in a while, mostly at the end of the chapter, but occasionally in the middle, you'll get a couple pages from Marianne's perspective, who is a secondary character. And the reason that we're doing that is because Marianne is an otherworlder. And since we're so heavily from Liam's perspective, if we didn't have this secondary perspective, we wouldn't know what was going on with the otherworlders. And so because it served a very particular purpose, it just worked really, really well. so the pacing of it is a little bit weird. So the beginning is a little bit slow, especially the first 150 pages, as we're kind of setting up what life is like on this island and Liam and his place in this community, and then setting up his relationship with Annabel. It's all a little bit slow. And then it picks up, but like, even though there's a lot happening, it doesn't really drive each plot forward very much. So it's fast but kind of slow. It's that weird thing. And I did think that in general it was, for me personally, it was slowed down a little bit further by, like, every once in a while we'd have these scenes with Annabel and Liam being lovey-dovey at each other, which I didn't really particularly need. So I thought it slowed it down a little bit, but it may be okay for you. So last thing I want to talk about, is this a good retelling of Annabel Lee? And I actually think that this is a great retelling of Annabel Lee. Like I said, it gives those Edgar Allan Poe vibes of like this bleak, oppressive story. How the plot unfolds is very reminiscent of Edgar Allan Poe. And the other thing that was included that I actually really, really like is that, at least how I was taught to interpret the Annabel Lee poem, is that at the end, it's clear in the interpretation that our narrator has kind of lost touch with reality, that this, in his grief for Annabel Lee, has lost touch with reality, that this was a bit of an obsessive kind of love, right? And that idea of an obsessive kind of love is lightly touched on throughout the story. Now, occasionally when like one of them is fearful for the other's life, it comes much more forward and is a bigger deal. But otherwise, we just get light touches, like the whole, somebody mentions in passing, like, oh, Annabelle's entire personality kind of changed and it was for the better. Like, it's that kind of thing where it's like, those are some unhealthy dynamics to obsessive love. And we kind of see that maybe it is that kind of obsessive, unhealthy obsessive love that we got from the poem. And so I think that was really nicely done as well. And so, yeah, I do think that this is actually a really great retelling of this poem. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars. I do think that there are some things that could definitely have been improved upon. And to some extent, that rating also reflects the fact that, even though I think that this is a great retelling, it also really, I'm not the intended audience, and I kind of felt that while reading it. And so that's why. But I do think that it is still a really good read, and I recommend it. So that's all I have, you guys. If you have read this story, or if you're interested in reading this story, please come talk to me down in the comments. But that's all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, guys, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.